Alright, so in this lesson we're going to get to what you've probably all been waiting for, the sculpting part of this series. I'm going to teach you how to actually sculpt on this guy. Now you can see here obviously we have the demo head open. Again, one more time if you don't remember, you can go open through Lightbox, demo head, just double click on that, draw it into your scene, make sure you're in edit mode. Once we got that in there, it already has a predefined kind of sculpted detail in there, and it already has subdivision levels to it also. So we're going to start fresh with this though, and the way we're going to do this is to just take down our subdivision levels in our geometry menu over here, delete the higher levels, and now we have the lower subdivision level. And we'll just go ahead and divide once more up to 3 times, but since it's a new kind of topology, more or less, we're getting different detail. We're getting a lot smoother mesh here, so it's a lot more better for a starter palette to work with. So anyway, now the first thing we're gonna do, the first thing I'm gonna show you is symmetry. I have it on right now. You can tell by the 2 dots. I just turned it off, and basically it's going to be off by default. So when you sculpt, you're just going to be sculpting on one side. This isn't always desirable. I mean, a lot of things are going to be symmetrical, so most of the time you're going to be using the symmetry option. But sometimes if you want to break up your design or something like that, or if you have asymmetrical parts, you can just turn it off and go ahead with your sculpting. But most of the time you're going to be using symmetry. So to turn on symmetry, you can either go up here to the transform menu and down here at activate symmetry. You click that on and it's on. The easy way to do this is to just simply hit the X key. You hit the X key once, turn it off, hit the X key, turn it on. Simple as that. Okay, and quickly too, I'm just going to explain real fast. I'm going to be using a tablet to show you how to sculpt. A Wacom tablet more specifically. I have a smaller bamboo tablet that I'm using. There are a couple different tablet manufacturers out there. You can take your pick, and but Wacom's the most popular one. So if you haven't got a Wacom tablet yet, I would definitely suggest looking into investing in one, because it's a pretty useful tool. But it does not necessarily mean that sculpting a really nice mesh or anything is impossible without a tablet, because it's not. You can get some really good detail if you're just careful with your intensity and all that. My shredder character on my portfolio website actually was done completely with the mouse, because I didn't have access to a Wacom tablet at the time. So it's possible, but we're going to use a Wacom tablet for this to show you the more in-depth features. So I'm now using the Wacom tablet. You won't be hearing any clicks from the mouse. But alright, to get started, basically we're just going to look up here in the Z add and Z sub. Now one of these has to be on for you to sculpt. That's pretty much the integral part of the menu there. By default, Z add is on. You can turn Z sub on if you absolutely want to just stay in your subtractive sculpting. But if you leave Z add on, the easy way to do this is to actually just hold the Alt key. And if you hold the Alt key down, it's going to sculpt subtractive. And it won't be on. You won't see it switch or anything like that. There's no indicator really, but it's on if you just hold the Alt key. That's the hotkey for that. Otherwise, you have Z add on, it's going to have additive sculpting. Okay. And if you haven't figured it out yet, to sculpt, you simply just left click down on the mouse or press down on the Wacom tablet with the pen. And our sensitivity is set pretty high right now. or intensity rather. It's set pretty high right now, so we're getting some really bubbly, really tumor-like sculpting in here. So obviously not very pretty. But basically this is the intensity up here. You can change the intensity of your sculpting by doing that, switching around this and messing with this. Get something maybe subtle, or you can go up, and I think by default it's set at 35 if I remember correctly, so you'll get some pretty crazy stuff in here. But anyway, you also have your focal shift and your draw size. Well, like I said before, my really crappy resolution doesn't really allow for me to see this. So I more often than not find myself using the spacebar to bring up the little menu here, which includes my Z intensity, draw size, and focal shift. So I can just switch it on the fly, and I personally find it to be a lot easier, a lot faster for my workflow. So if I wanted to sharpen up the focal shift and get a harder edge, you can do it that way. So we'll go back to the default here, and starting over here, I'll just show you real fast. The standard brush is the one you're always going to start out with. It's useful. It can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes, but you're able, if you're tricky enough, you can get some really solid detail out of it. You just kind of have to know how to use it in the right spots and stuff. And I'm not really paying much attention to what I'm doing right now. I'm just kind of giving him this stupid look. Yeah. So anyway, up here, again, you're going to have your shelf, which is going to have your default brushes in it. By default, of course, you'll have the standard. You also have the smooth. Now you'll see when you click on the smooth, it doesn't necessarily just switch. It tells you that you have to hold down the shift key to use the smooth. So make sure you're holding down the shift key. You'll see your cursor change color, and that way you can smooth out what you have. Now keep in mind too that when you're smoothing, if you're at a really high resolution, it's not really going to smooth out the larger details, because there's a lot of polygons there that's trying to evenly spread out and smooth. If you want to smooth out the larger details, like if you wanted to get rid of some of this form or something like that, you can see it's really, really subtly smoothing it out. But maybe we really, really want to just smooth down this whole entire brow area or something, you'd have to go back to a lower subdivision level. So that's another reason it's useful to keep a good amount of subdivision levels in your geometry menu here. So when you go back to your lower subdivision level and you smooth it out, you can see there's a lot more effect with the smoothing. And then you can switch back up to a higher subdivision level, and those large details will be gone. We'll jump back here. Alright, and then up here, also in the default brushes, you have clay and you have clay build up. And the only difference between these really is the clay. It's going to give you a kind of clayish, as defined by the name, clayish look. This can be, I found this actually to be pretty useful when defining muscle groups. And other things like that. it gives you an interesting texture to the skin. So, and then clay buildup does the same thing really, but it uses a square alpha, so it gives it a tube-like shape. This is also good for building up muscle groups. And so that way you have a better idea of where your forms are coming from. My muscle groups are not exactly accurate either in this. I'm just really quickly sketching to give you the idea of what it does. So anyway, the next one I want to show you with the basic brushes, it's not going to be up here. This is your transpose, by the way. This is the same thing as using the move, scale, and rotate like I had showed you in the first few lessons. But don't worry about that because I already showed you how to use it. So if you don't remember, you can go back and check that out again. But anyway, so aside from your default brushes, you're going to also be using a lot of the move tool. And like I said with the picker menu here, if you can't locate the brush right away, just click the first letter of the brush. Just type it in, hit the key, and it'll bring up all those brushes with that starting letter. So we'll select the move tool. And move can be pretty useful if you need to further define some shapes or something. Like if we had sculpted this guy out or something and we wanted to give him a wider jaw, it might be a little easier than going in there with the standard brush or the inflate brush, which I have yet to show you actually. This guy's looking very freakish, but that's okay, because we like freaks. So anyway, the inflate brush, like I said, is it's very similar to the standard brush, but it's going to be more reminiscent of inflating the other side of this with air. But it can be very useful with defining forms too. And a lot of times when you're roughing out an initial form, you'll be building it up and then smoothing it back, and building up and smoothing it back. And that's just to keep the kind of blend between the forms going, so you don't have anything too blobby. Let's give this guy some lips. It's looking very strange without his lips. Okay, well that's not exactly a good lip. But it'll work. Now, show you another brush too real fast that could fix some problems like this. You can see here with the lip, it's very blobby and bloated and doesn't look good at all. Good way to kind of patch that up a little bit is to use the pinch brush. Again, just click P and you bring up that. And what the pinch brush does is it brings your polygons together exactly what it says. It pinches your polygons together to give yourself a harder edge, thus defining some more features a little better. Now, this can be really useful, but keep in mind too that when you use it, it pinches your topology together, and so you might lose resolution on the outside of the pinched area, and you might need to use Dynamesh or something to get your resolution back in that area, so it's not spread out too far and giving you bad details or bad texture or anything. So just be careful with that. But we'll use that to define his jawline a little more. And define the brow line. So obviously this guy's looking very freakish, but that's okay, we're just having fun. Okay, and we'll jump back to the standard brush. I'm going to show you another little thing here. Up here in the brush menu, if you click on the brush menu and then you look down here, you'll see your curve and you'll see your depth menu. This is just another way to modify your brush strokes. And you can edit the curve of your brush by using this little graph editor here and moving around these curve points. And what the curve basically is it's a profile of your brush. If you were to look at the brush from the side or something, and it would have this profile, this kind of bump, this curve to it. So that's going to give you further definition with your stroke. And just adjusting that in several different ways can give you some different results. So you can just experiment with that. Raise our intensity up. You'll get sharper edges, more defined curve, or something like that. So you can just mess around with that, get some different results. And down here in the depth menu, the depth basically is what the brush's relation to the surface is, as far as goes how far out or how far in it goes. If you bring it down here and you started sculpting, it's gonna act like the brush is sculpting somewhat below the surface, so you're gonna get a shallower sculpt. But if you were to bring it up outside the surface, then you're gonna get that curve kind of defined outside, and you'll get a more rounded off details. So you can use that to edit your curve and get some interesting results. Just set it back to 0. Depth mask is basically the same thing, except it's giving you 2 extra points to define. So you can get a different kind of profile there. Once again, just giving you different results. We'll turn depth mask off and leave it there. And the gravity strength down here is pretty much what it says it is. It's going to be how much the gravity is affecting the stroke. You can see here with that set up, it's acting like the gravity is pushing down on the stroke, so you're getting mud face because of it. But we'll set that back to 0 too. They're just fun ways to edit your stroke and all that. But you're going to find yourself using the standard tools a lot more often. Okay, and then another really useful tool is going to be up here in the stroke menu. And it's called Lazy Mouse. You can click that on right there. Now with Lazy Mouse, with that on, and you go ahead and make a stroke, you see we have this red line dragging behind it now. Well, this is for creating smoother strokes. You can see how this can be used efficiently if you have an instance to where you're trying to maybe draw a smooth curve around his face or something. It's going to average out all your strokes and it's going to smooth it out as you stroke along there. See, if you were to turn it off, we might have this blobby, undefined, not really super accurate stroke. You know, again, turn it back on, it's going to be a smooth, defined stroke. So again, you can see how that can be useful in a lot of instances. And under the lazy mouse menu, I'll just show you some basic tools. You have the lazy step, which is essentially how far spaced apart the dots in your stroke are. Like if you were to have dots selected, that's going to be a kind of thing you can use with alphas. I won't show you exactly how to use alphas yet. I got that in a later lesson, but we'll just open up one for an example right now. Just this really sharp-edged round dot here, and you see normally I have this at 25, 24. It's close enough. And it's going to be a smooth stroke because there's not a lot of spacing, but you can still kind of see the spacing between them because it's not set as lowest or anything. But if we were to set this higher to 1.95 maybe, then it's going to put that much spacing between each of these dots. So now when we stroke, we're going to get spacing between these dots. And now you can probably start to see the possibilities of this. Maybe if you were making rivets or something around his head. And you can really get some ornate stuff if you're crafty with it. You can use different alphas and all kinds of stuff. You can get really, really cool stuff with that. Sometimes your lazy radius right here is going to be set to 1, giving you almost no control over your lazy stroke. That might be what you want, but most of the time it won't be. Make sure it's up to a reasonable level. It doesn't necessarily have to be a specific number, but it's going to be what you feel comfortable with. And make sure it's up to a reasonable level so that you have that red line dragging behind and you have more control and it's not so erratic. So that right there. And the next thing I want to show you here is the curve mode. This is relatively new, actually. I'm just going to show you a quick idea of how it's used. What it's basically doing is going to draw out a curve for you. And it's going to use this curve to define a stroke. And you can draw out that just by dragging along the curve. You can see I dragged that a little bit there. Just make sure that when you undo, because when you undo it's going to disappear. You pretty much have to start over again, which kind of sucks, but that's the way it is. So you can draw that out there. We got a really defined curve. What I use this for most of the time is as a line. If you turn on as line and make sure you turn off bend, it's going to just give you a straight line. And this isn't really so much useful in sculpting for me, but I use it a lot in texturing and in masking off things. It's going to give you a really accurate mask, which can be very, very useful if you need really sharp defined curves, because I can draw another line here and then anti-mask it. Should be able to. And therefore get a sharper curve. And you can actually see this in use in my tutorial videos for MMX 1985, which you can find a link at below if you would like to take a look at that. There are some better examples of me using the curve tool in that. So anyway, we'll turn off curve, turn off lazy mouse. That gives you a good idea. All this other stuff is really just modifiers and attributes. Feel free to play around in it. I just kind of showed you the basic functionality of it, and that's really, for the most part, all you need to know. Okay, then moving on, we'll go with the rest of the stroke menu here. You open up the stroke menu, you have, like I showed you before, you have your drag rectangle, you have your freehand, color spray, spray, and drag dot. Click on the drag rectangle and turn off your alpha. If you've been following along and maybe you chose that, turn off your alpha. And I'm just going to show you real fast that the drag rectangle, basically, if you put down on one spot and then you drag out, kind of the same way you were doing with the tool when you first put it into the scene, you're going to drag out that shape. Okay, well by default the shape is kind of a smoothed off circle. But I'll show you an example with an alpha. If you were to do this with an alpha, and we chose this random one over here, these dots, it's going to drag that out. And that's going to be able to give you great amounts of detail, especially when you get into more smaller alphas and stuff like that. You can give him scales and horns and whatever you want. Really make it crazy and really start to let your creativity flow with that. Okay, but we'll get into the alphas, like I said, a little more later. But I just wanted to show you how the drag rectangle works, same way. Freehand is basically the same as the drag dot, or not the drag dot, the regular dot stroke. Except it's going to give you a smooth stroke every time. Okay. Color spray is going to give you a random spray kind of stroke, which can be useful a lot like the alphas if you want to make maybe muddy or burned up or something gross. I don't know. Crazy results. This one's going to be a lot more random than its counterpart, spray. Spray is going to have a slightly more defined stroke to it, but it's only going to stick to one color. This isn't so much a difference if you're using this for sculpting as it is for texturing. If you use it for texturing, then you'll see the difference between the color spray and spray with the colors they use from the palette down here. Okay, moving on, the drag dot. This is basically the same as drag rectangle, except you're dragging a single entity, a single instance of whatever alpha or anything you have selected. Again, by default, it's going to be a kind of smoothed off circle, so you can see we're dragging this in. And this can be good if you want to place certain things really accurately. But if we were to use an alpha, for this, for instance, we're just placing that single instance of the alpha on him. Pretty self-explanatory. Alright, so now I'm going to show you how to use the masking, which is also another very important thing though in ZBrush. It's something you're going to use in combination with your sculpting, with your texturing, your materials, everything at one point or another. So to start doing that, all you simply have to do is hold down the control key and the cursor changes. I explained this already before, but we'll get more into depth right here. And once you hold that down, the control key, cursor changes and you start to draw out a mask. Now the mask is always going to be this dark color, and it shows you what parts of the model are masked off. If you're unfamiliar with masking, maybe you haven't even messed with Photoshop or anything yet, you're completely new to it, think of it this way. It's like putting masking tape on your wall and then stroking paint over it. Well, when you pull that masking tape up, obviously the paint's not going to be on the wall in that area. Same idea. So quickly, we'll just lay down a mask of a mask. Sure, why not? And the same way you can use subtractive sculpting, you can use that with masking too. When you're holding the control key, just hold the alt key at the same time. That turns up subtractive masking. So now you're taking away from your mask, your stroke. Okay, so we got crazy mask man here. So it'll work fine. And now we can sculpt on the outside of the mask. Whoops, turn my alpha off. Turn on your dot stroke if you haven't gone back to doing that yet. You can see now we're sculpting around this mask, and it's not affecting any of this area. Okay. So that's pretty cool. Well, obviously the mask of him is not going to be on the outside here. We want this part to come out and define the mask as it is, right? So to do that, you can either go down here, close out our subtool menu, it's getting in the way, and our geometry menu. And down here in the rest of these menus, you're going to see this one here, masking. Click on that, and you're going to have a few options to play around with here. Firstly, view mask is on by default when you draw a mask. That means this black part, this mask, is visible to you. If you click view mask off, it's going to get rid of that. But keep in mind the mask is still on. It's just not visible. So you can still sculpt in, and that mask will stay intact, and everything you sculpt around it will go around it. So you can turn that on and off with that. And then you also have invert mask, which is going to invert and give us that desired mask there, which obviously doesn't look very good with the default sculpting brush because there are easier and more efficient ways to get it. But to give you the right idea, anyway, that's that. Maybe we'll switch to a larger brush size. Oh, and a way lower intensity to give us the more defined mask. Okay, let's turn mask back on just so we know where we are. And you can also click clear, obviously just to clear the mask. It's not visible, but it's not there at all. You're sculpting in a clean surface now. So undo back to that. You can also mask all, which is going to, of course, mask everything. And blur mask and sharpen mask. Now, sometimes if the the topology isn't there. Because remember, your mask and all your texturing acts just like texturing. Your mask relies on the resolution of the mesh. So the more polygons, the smoother your lines are going to be on your mesh. And sometimes if you need to kind of compensate for that, if you have a little bit of a harsher line here and you want to kind of blur that horizon, just click blur mask. And that's going to blur it a little bit. Now sometimes it'll blur it too much because again, this is reliant on the resolution of the mesh. But it'll blur it a little bit and you'll have a smoother transition for the mask. Okay, back up. You can also sharpen the mask, and obviously it sharpens it. Well, sometimes if you're not careful, and again reliant on your topology, you're going to get some artifacts sometimes, which is not really desirable in most cases. But it can be helpful sometimes, especially if you have the geometry and the polygon resolution there to compensate for it. A little trick that I learned is that you can actually blur it first. You'll give this really blurry one, and then you can hit sharpen, and it'll give you a slightly more defined but blurred edge. So it can make things a little easier on you. Okay, so that's how you do that. And the hotkeys to do this, which is going to be something you're going to want to know. It's a lot easier to use, so you don't have to always keep coming down here and using the masking menu. Hold Control and click outside of the screen. Okay, you can see what that did? That inversed our mask. As you just keep doing that over and over, it's just going to keep inversing it one way or another. If you hold Control and drag outside of the screen, that's going to clear your mask. Okay. So that's that. We'll go ahead and close our masking menu, and we will, you know what, let's just go ahead and inverse, and we'll just draw him out. We'll give him a mask, make him look like a luchador or something. Click drag rectangle. That's going to be a pretty cool thing you use there. And if you just drag it out, make sure your intensity is high enough. You just drag it out. Now we kind of have a mask. Yeah, it's ugly though. Turn on symmetry. Make sure your symmetry is on. And we'll drag it out from this side. So we'll get equal definition on both sides. And then clear our mask off. And we kind of have a luchador mask there. Yes. So. Ooh. That's how you do that. And show you another thing here with masking sometimes. And we're going to switch to a different piece of geometry. You remember earlier I had the subtool chapter of our series. I was using the demo soldier guy, and we had his backpack. Okay, you don't have to bring this up, just take note, because you might not have this if you reopen ZBrush or anything like that. You might not have this, so just take note. You don't have to follow along. Sometimes you'll have an instance where your geometry has this thin kind of back-to-back polygon spacing. You can see obviously this is a whole body of a polygon. It's not like a single plane or anything. These are polygons that are back to back. This is one side and this is one side. Well, if you have something like that and you go and you mask it, then it's going to mask through the other side sometimes. And maybe that's not exactly what you want, because maybe you want detail on this side, but you don't want it on this side. So an easy fix to that, drag off our mask there. An easy fix to that, go up here to the brush menu. And up here in the brush menu, you go down to this menu, auto masking, right here. Open that up, and down here you'll see backface masking, or backface auto mask. Click that on. And what that is basically going to do is now when you mask, it's going to make sure, oh, that did not work. That's why. Keep in mind too that your sculpting paradigm and your masking paradigm are going to hold their own settings. So for instance, if I right now I have backface masking on for my sculpting, it's not going to sculpt through the other side. Hold control. Make sure you're holding control whenever you turn on the backface masking option. Otherwise, it won't work. So now you can see if we mask it, you see through on the other side. It's not there. Because with backface masking on, we're protecting that side of the mesh. So now we can go and sculpt in details to this side of the mesh without interrupting this side of the mesh. You know, because we don't want any detail there. Okay. So again, like I said, just make note up here in the brush menu under auto masking, backface mask. Okay. So let's switch back to our demo head. Okay, and the last thing, the last bit of stuff I want to show you with the masking. You can see I went and undid. I did the undo all the way back to before we pulled out the geometry from the mask. And the reason I wanted to do this was to show you a little bit more little extra cool features you can do use in conjunction with masking. First thing I'll show you is the rectangle masking. Well, technically by default it's always going to use a rectangle. If you drag from the outside of the screen while holding the control key down, it's going to make a rectangle. And this is basically which part of the area you're masking. See, I just did that, mask the whole top here. Okay. So let's do this real fast. Click and drag over here and give him a strap for his mask. Okay. And we'll use some of the anti-subtractive masking to get rid of this little bit that's over the ear, so we don't have an issue with that messing with the ear or anything. Make sure you get it on the inside of the ear too. You'll get some weird artifacts if you're not careful. Okay. So we got that there. And in the same vein as that, you can use masking with any of these strokes. Okay? You can use masking as long as you're holding down the control key and your masking is on. You can select any of these, and you can see we get a couple new options too with masking individually. You get the new options anyway. You get the rectangle option, which is the same thing as dragging off screen, except with the rectangle option you can drag anywhere on the mesh and make a rectangle. Okay. With the circle option, same idea. You can drag anywhere on the mesh, get a circle. Obviously it didn't do a circle in here. The reason for this is because I have Symmetry on, so it's drawing it on both sides, and it's drawing it all the way through the mesh. When you mask with the shapes, you're going to be drawing all the way through the mesh. So this is projecting all the way through the shoulder on the other side, and since we have Symmetry on, it's also going to show on that shoulder. Yeah. The curve tool, which is basically going to give you a kind of fall off gradient type thing. You can get different results with that, with your symmetry on. And then the lasso tool, which is basically just like the lasso in Photoshop. A custom selection of sorts. Unfortunately, you can't use lazy mouse with this, so you're gonna get you have to have a pretty steady hand to get a smooth selection. Okay, so we'll just go back to our regular dots right here, and I'll show you the rest of the masking. Like I said, you can use it with any of these. Sometimes I'll use the drag dot mask to give myself buttons or rivets or something. Okay. But you get the idea. You can also use your masking with your alphas. And you can, we'll just select this guy right here. If you have this selected, and obviously I have drag dot, my stroke drag dot, you're going to be dragging this around. It's not easily seen because it's a lower resolution of the mesh right now, and this is a pretty defined alpha, but I'm not going to worry about that yet because it's not going to be that important. Just draw it large enough to where it's discernible. You can also, the best way to do this with alphas is to use your drag rectangle, because alphas are almost always going to be isolated in some way. So you can drag that out and you can scale that alpha out. Let's choose something with a little more defined edge to it. This guy right here. Okay. And if we just inverse that, we can now draw out whatever's in that alpha there. And we have a hard line right here. We'll fix that actually with the blurring, but same idea here. Blur mask, and we'll sharpen it back so we have a slightly defined edge to play with. Go ahead and sharpen again. It'll be a little more defined. You can see we got rid of that staircasing there for the most part. It's a lot smoother than it was before. Let's go ahead and turn our mask off. Turn view mask off with that button. And make sure real quickly, let's make sure we have it set the way we want this part coming out, okay? Not the part that's masked off. We want the mask itself coming out. So, masking, turn that off. And now what I'm going to show you is the deformation menu, which is just above the masking menu. Open that up and you get this whole slew of options to play with. The one you're going to likely use the most is the inflate. And what the inflate does is it uniformly inflates the mesh beyond that mask. So be careful when you're clicking around this area, because if you click down here, it's gonna suck it in, and it's gonna assume you wanted that value at that end of the scale, and obviously something that extreme is going to give us this. So undo that. The best way to do this is to kind of work in smaller values, and dragging it is not going to be real accurate. So what I do all the time is click right in the middle just above the slider, and you'll see it pops up with a little number here, and when that comes up, all you do is punch in a value, say 10, and enter, and you see now we have it inflated, and you see it inflated it uniformly around the mask. So obviously this is something a lot more desirable to what we would want. Now let's turn masking back on and smooth it, blur it, and sharpen it again. See if we can get a slightly more smoother edge. There. And also another little trick you can use is when you first bring it out like that, maybe you'll say, okay, well this edge is too smooth. It doesn't really look like it's blending into the face. Well, you can give yourself a nice little sharp indentation here by sharpening the mask that's already on there. You'll sharpen it back, and all it's going to do is sharpen the edge. So go ahead and go back up to inflate and give it a smaller value. We'll just say half a value at 5. Enter that in, and you could see it brought out what was already there, but it brought it out too with a slightly more defined edge. So it's going to look like it fits the face a lot more now, which is a good thing. It's a little hard to tell too with this material, the red wax material, but we played with materials before, so let's go ahead and turn on a basic material, and that's not what we want. Let's see if we can fill that in. That may have something to do with the subtool itself. I'm not real sure what's going on there. It's acting very strange with the materials. Oh, okay, never mind. It's because we still have the mask applied. Durr. Alright, yeah, so just make sure your mask is off. Obviously it wasn't visible before. But if you need to make sure, just click mask on off here. And if it doesn't come up, you know it's off. So let's refill all that in. Now we have that material applied. So it's a little more accurate here. The highlights are more accurate anyway. Okay, so that's mostly, for the most part, what you're going to be using with masking. We're also going to show you a little more later on how to use masking with texturing, which is also another useful thing. But play around with it. You can get some really cool results. Different things, different shapes, different details. It's really fun to play with your sculpting. So, okay, so next we'll be showing you how to use some more uncommon brushes to get some really cool and different details on your brush. So, next chapter.